In light of Daredevil appearing in X-Men 97 and his new show coming to Disney Plus, eventually, I found myself on a Daredevil craving. So I thought, why not take a look back at where it all started? And I like collecting physical comics when I can afford it. So I went to my local comic shop and got the first 11 issues in the Mighty Marvel Masterworks collection. And boy, are they something. As a kid, I knew of Daredevil because of shows like Spider-Man the Animated Series in the 90s and other minor appearances, but I think I got familiar with him through the Netflix show, which is probably the most successful adaptation. But that was of course a lot grittier than what we're looking at here. Now, just so we're all clear, I'm not a comic aficionado. I don't have a wealth of knowledge on the production history or lore or things like that like other people do. So if you're here for an explanation, sorry. I just thought it would be fun to document my journey through Daredevil comics as I make my way through to the more recent stuff. So let's start at the very beginning in Daredevil number 1, literally called The Origin of Daredevil. Wasting absolutely no time. Guess I'm just so used to origin stories coming later, in this day and age. We start on a scene of 4 gangsters sitting around a table with one light hanging over them because interior decorating is not their specialty. And on the first page alone, they make sure to set up and explain the central antagonist, the Fixer. We haven't got all day, the Fixer may be here soon. You know when the Fixer snaps his fingers, we all hop. And when Daredevil makes his sassy stance entrance, I mean, look at that pose. One says, maybe the Fixer can use you. I love how it's in bold, every single time. I'd also like to highlight the comment on Daredevil's nutty getup, because damn if he isn't right though, because it just doesn't hold up well at all. I mean, as he beats them up, the costume starts to work a little better against all the bright colors, but only somewhat. I'd also like to take a look at all this fat shaming, because wow, even Daredevil, I mean, like, damn, I know he's the bad guy, but geez, you don't have to hurt him so emotionally too. That said, besides the fat shaming, I wasn't aware of Daredevil's quip game. Almost gives Spider-Man a run for his money. As for who I am, you can just call me Daredevil. Gotta love the frankness of the writing. Back before the organic names like Fan Stick.
Say that again?
Which leads to a straight cut to the origin. I mean, what a perfect time to show it, huh? So if you're familiar with the Netflix show, you might recognize some of the beats here in the origin, such as Matt's dad being a boxer in need of help, or that his dad encourages him to study more than anything else. Not even letting him play sports? I mean, damn. Matt, of course, becomes the social pariah because in 20th century America, if you don't enjoy sports, then you're a loser. Well, don't feel too bad, Matt. At least your face isn't as creepy looking. I mean, relatively speaking. Anyways, this leads Matt to train in secret, because you gotta get that secrecy in early if you're gonna be a superhero, while still maintaining his studies. If you call straight A's alright. Nerd! But while Matt has his problems, his dad has bigger problems. Haven't been able to land a fight in weeks. Only guy who'll manage a guy like you is the Fixer. So Battling Jack ends up under the thumb of the Fixer and walks away happy. As he goes to tell his son the good news, he finds he isn't home. This is where we see the iconic inciting incident. While walking home, Matt sees a blind man crossing the street, intentional irony methinks, and uses his supple muscles to save him from the oncoming truck, which of course leads to him becoming blind from the chemicals carried by the truck. This is of course devastating, I think, because his dad is already talking about an operation to cure him and looks unbothered, like no trauma or anything from this, nothing. And Matt is already going at it at the gym literally days later, but this is where Matt discovers his built-in radar, and naturally, what better time for a time skip? Straight from high school to college, with of course no apparent struggle to speak of in adjusting, but whatever. But it seems, despite a terrible accident and subsequent trip to the hospital, and then going to college, what would be today cause for near financial ruin, the Murdochs seem to be just fine due to Matt's dad having a spike in his boxing career. This naturally has to do with the Fixer, who's been fixing the fights in his favor, but is about to set him up to take a dive. Matt and Foggy are planning on going to the fight, while Matt seems really excited, telling himself how well he feels things. So the night of the fight comes where Battling Jack is supposed to lose, but just because his son is there, he just doesn't want to disappoint him. I mean, I get it, but it's just one fight, right? You can still make it look good at least. But because Matt's dad decided to go against the Fixer, this ends up with him taking that dive from earlier. So after one panel of grieving, Matt goes on to graduate, and the two open up their law firm, and we're introduced to Karen Page, who we waste no time establishing as the love interest by Matt hearing how lovely she is, and hearing somehow that she's 5'4", which was important for him, I guess. But we do get back to Matt's desire for justice against his dad's murderer, and makes his iconic ugly-ass suit. I've come to grow on it, honestly, but it's just so jarring compared to the red. And the fact that it doesn't even last that long is funny, but we'll get there. He also displays his ability to design his costume and modify his cane to be a multi-purpose weapon because he's just so sensitive to touch. I think we should just add these to the list of abilities that the chemicals gave him. With his new persona made, Matt goes after the Fixer, and we return to the present. I love this line where Daredevil has no idea what to do next. Do you take me to the Fixer, or... And the man himself just swaggers in with the corniest gangsters by his side. And naturally, when a villain has henchmen, the henchman must go down, which poses no trouble for Daredevil as he takes every thought bubble as an opportunity to explain just how exactly he knows what they're gonna do. But hey, that's his secret, pal. I will admit, it's still a little cool to see Daredevil show the ability to attack without looking and not just be like, I'm Daredevil, that's why. Unlike some heroes. And now we get to see him display the ability to detect lies, which he just uses to keep accusing people of things, you know, as a good lawyer would. But almost as soon as we learn of another ability, we learn of one of Daredevil's greatest weaknesses, his distractibility, which happens a lot, as we'll see down the road. In this case, it's just because he's so focused on listening to the pulse rate that he gets shoved out a window, and almost in a Looney Tunes type fashion, swings on a flagpole outside and flies back in. I love it. While this is happening, we cut to Foggy going to check in on Matt, only to find him gone. And so we start what I think is one of the cringier parts, the blatant pitying that the writers use in these stories because Matt is blind. And in later issues, it just gets worse. Speaking of worse, just listen to this. Entering the new office, Foggy finds it as unoccupied, except for the most decorative accessory. We all know this is the 60s, so of course this is going to be all over the place, but man, is it going to be painful every time. And of course, because this is a woman written by a man in the 60s, all she can talk about is men. And also talk about how horrible Matt's blindness is. But just as she is saying that, we cut back to Daredevil and the Fixer, where Matt decides to bluff that he recorded the conversation, which leads to the Fixer literally pulling the rug out from Daredevil and wrenches his arm. Guess there was no flagpole to save him that time. And Daredevil gives chase disguised as supple Matt Murdock until they get to the subway, where he stands in front of them in costume with just the cockiest little smile. They of course run away, which leads to the funniest part for me. As Daredevil hits one guy, he goes after the Fixer while running on top of a barrel, which doesn't hit him because he then gets a heart attack from running. But I guess that's just some classic Marvel karma for you. Things, of course, are all wrapped up in a neat little bow as Matt returns to Foggy and Karen without them suspecting a thing. And we end on a pretty sweet note of Matt looking off, hoping his dad can rest easier now. For the first issue, it was very cheesy, of course, but it's just so much fun, even if it's very dated. It's interesting to see how much is actually missing from what is commonly associated with Daredevil nowadays, you know, in the show and stuff. Namely, his Christianity, among a lot of darker things that Frank Miller brought in. But there's still plenty there that has not changed. I think all of the beats you could get from the 2015 show are still there, even if it's less developed, way less developed. But that was classic Marvel for you. Fun, simple entertainment. Just good to sit back and read in your spare time, I think. And even funnier now looking back. So, in the last issue, we saw Daredevil's origin story and how he took on the people who killed his father and established his supporting cast, Foggy and Karen. We covered a lot last issue, but this time we see Daredevil take on his first superpowered / gimmicky foe, Electro. And you might be as surprised as me to hear that, considering he's a Spider-Man rogue, but here we are. It seems like Daredevil steals a lot of Spider-Man's rogues. I mean, Kingpin, Punisher, heck, it won't be long till we see Spider-Man himself in these issues, but again, we'll get there in Volume 2. Let's start with these covers, because there is so much going on. Like, the Thing is there in the corner, blink and you'll miss him, as if the pages are going to turn themselves. I love the subheading on the second cover. What chance does a blind man have of defeating one of the most dangerous arch-villains of all time? More chance than you think if his name is Daredevil. It reads like one of those YouTube clickbait titles, where they talk for 5 minutes about the actual thing you clicked on before showing it for 5 seconds. So remember how the Thing was shown in the cover, and it was made out to be like he was going to be a blink and you'll miss it cameo? Well, as soon as you turn the page, He literally bursts through the door. I think the only way you could miss this is if you just didn't read. Wow, this really is clickbait. So what's the reason Thing breaks down the door and somehow welds it together? Sorry, when did he get that power? Well, because the Fantastic Four need a lawyer to go through their lease, which is of course Matt Murdock's specialty, who of course isn't here. I will say the Thing really eats it up in his brief appearance, because he's just oozing with charisma and jokes. But now he has to leave because the rest of the Fantastic Four are waiting outside for him. Why they couldn't walk in and not break down the door is another question. So the four take off, with Sue taking an interest in Karen's hairdo, like her thought bubbles right at the center of the panel. And if we want to keep track of all the dated writing, I did want to mention the out-of-pocket comment Foggy makes about Karen's crazy perfume. Like, this is just funny to read. Okay. Now let's get to the man himself, Daredevil, who's in the middle of busting a car theft scheme and having a grand old time. It seems like at this point he's just gotten so comfortable with the whole superhero biz, down to the witty banter. And I know we have to suspend our disbelief here, but you want me to believe this man put a car engine in a tire and then used only his body to slingshot that car engine into the guys. I don't even know what to say. After Daredevil wraps things up in tires, we find none other than Electro is watching, and we get a brief origin for him in a single panel, like a little story time. But in order to make this all tie together so naturally, Electro finds out about the Fantastic Four heading out and decides to break into their building. And yeah, Electro just makes the weirdest faces throughout this whole issue, as we will see. But as he does that, Matt returns to the office thinking of how his power is too simple for him. And I mean, yeah, if you can slingshot a car engine with your body, maybe you're not wrong. When he returns to the office, Karen tells him about the lease and that he needs to go to the Fantastic Four building. She also tells Matt about the possibility of an eye operation from a friend of hers, something that Matt isn't exactly thrilled about, in fear of losing his powers. But Karen, she's more busy thinking about how doggone wonderful Matt is and how she'd marry him even if he's blind. Like, girl. Then she's like, I hope he gets it. For his sake. Get out of here. Get out of here. Anyway, Electro is wasting absolutely no time climbing the building using the cables inside. Is there just no friction against the concrete? And deactivating the security, just as Matt gets to the front door and immediately senses danger, which I guess his radar sense can do too. Electro sees Daredevil, makes a weird face, as he tends to do, and goes for the attack. I do like this panel of the electrical waves around Daredevil. It's just so trippy and popping. That said, the art in this issue has really felt a little off for me and just not that great. There's just too much cross-hatching, I think, that bothers me the most. I also don't like the way some panels black out Daredevil's eyes. They just look really creepy. And have I mentioned Electro's weird faces? So despite avoiding most of the attacks, as if to backpedal on what we saw at the beginning of the issue, Daredevil tries to lift one of the Thing's weights in order to throw it at Electro, but can't, which leads to Electro knocking him out, and finds a rocket in the Fantastic Four inventory to launch him into space. Not the fate I expected for him, but hilarious all the same. I love how, as part of his plan, he's like, the Fantastic Four will think Daredevil stole their rocket. Like, how are they going to get to that conclusion? Through the security tape that will probably show you putting him in the rocket? And so, in Daredevil's second adventure ever, he is launched into space, unconscious, and apparently without part of his costume, because he's just yellow in this panel. Then he's back to normal in the next one. And by magic, at least the Harry Houdini method, he gets free and heads to the controls. Imagine a blind man operating a spaceship. It's so funny how the narration is trying so hard to keep you in disbelief, as if the barrel rolling from last issue and the tire were viable. And I love Daredevil's smile towards the camera when he redirects the ship. Such a happy little guy. By listening for the lack of heartbeats, he lands the ship in Central Park without hurting anybody, and a nearby police officer tries to arrest him for endangering people. Without skipping a beat, Daredevil just takes a horse from one of the carriage drivers, apparently called a hansom cab, something I never knew despite living in New York, and takes off with it. And hey, I'm all about freeing those horses. So apparently, he perfectly rides the horse into traffic and jumps off onto a flagpole. Also, we have no idea where that horse goes after this. While Daredevil is heading back to the Fantastic Four building, he changes back to Matt, so we can see Karen try and call after him and misconstrue him ignoring her as being mad at her for the drama. But then Matt's right back in his costume and hooks onto a sightseeing helicopter with his cane to surprise Electro. And the narration just keeps doubling down on this. They would be even more surprised at what they're seeing if they knew he was blind. Like, yes, we know he's blind. We got it. But he's able to land back in the Fantastic Four building because he knows the schedule of the helicopter. Listen, there's been a lot of ridiculous things going on, but where has this man got the time to memorize that? Well, whatever, because Electro was already breaking into the safe while making actually not such a creepy face this time. I'm so proud. But Daredevil crashes through the window, which is actually really funny to think about from Electro's perspective. You send a guy to space, then he comes crashing through the roof window, like, no wonder he's shocked. But just as quickly as they begin a chase, at this point I would be freaking exhausted, shout out to Daredevil's real power, stamina. This includes Daredevil latching his cane onto the electric cable and spinning his way down. If I could see what I'm doing, I might be scared stiff. Might be? Bro went to space where he could sense nothing but himself and the ship he was inside, jumped down from a helicopter, and this is what would scare him? And hold on, doesn't his radar sense act as sight? Like, he can't sense how high he is and how fast he's going? Anyways, their chase continues into a theater that they call a movie theater, but they have a stage and performers in, so isn't it just a theater? I don't know if this is just a different lingo for the time, so maybe that's just me. Electro uses the theater's abundant electricity to boost his power and whizzes around the stage, while Daredevil describes every sensation that's going on, even being able to tell the temperature has risen exactly 27 degrees. I have no words at this point. When Daredevil makes his way up to the catwalk where Electro is, he's immediately hit by a blast because the people were screaming so loud. See, I told you the last issue distractibility was one of his weaknesses. The man is able to detect changes in temperature to the degree and can follow Electro's current in the heart of New York City but gets overwhelmed in theaters. Well, as contrived as that sounds, the way Daredevil beats Electro is by dropping a big curtain on him, as if this man didn't break through a metal safe earlier. Listen, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not even going to try. Of course, Daredevil puts the stolen formula back in the safe and finds that he's too late to work on the lease. And when Matt returns to the office, he meets the Fantastic Four, who crash through the door again, and Matt has to tell them that he couldn't get to it. So the Fantastic Four leave to find someone who can work a bit faster. To be fair, this seems like it took place over like a day or so I don't know if he's that slow. The last panel is of Foggy reasonably being pretty upset over the loss of a huge client, and Matt just smiles and looks off. Like, imagine the conversation after that though. I would be furious. And that's the end of issue 2. Next time is when Daredevil goes up against his first original rogue, the Owl. And it's gonna be a trip for sure. A villain with a theme like that during this era? In the last 2 issues, Daredevil went through a lot, surprisingly. I mean, his origin story, avenging his father, fighting Electro, meeting the Fantastic Four. I feel like that's a lot to do for a superhero in literally their first 2 issues. But now we've made it to the 3rd issue, where Daredevil gets his first original rogue. I mean, you could count the Fixer, but I mean, he's dead. So let's go ahead and check out his debut. I'm sure an owl-themed villain from this era of comics won't be silly and outlandish at all. I will say I really like the second cover that almost looks like a classic horror movie poster, which they're really going for by promoting it as a movie-length action thriller. Movie length? I don't know if 20 pages is movie length, because every other issue is kind of the same length. It's very theatrical and pretty intimidating, and does a good job building up this guy as a threat. So we start the story on Wall Street. Home of the world's greatest financial minds? Oh boy. And we get a description of a mysterious man you'll never guess, who they describe as having no friends or loved ones, and the only thing that makes him human is the fact he was born. Absolutely ruthless. I might just use that. As he walks through the halls, he gets all these looks because his presence seems so fraught with evil, with menace. This is the energy I imagine I have when I'm listening to my music. I also like perching myself on rooftops like Daredevil. Got that lone wolf energy. So the Owl enters his office, and at this point, the way they present him makes me think he's just a repressed theater kid, with the dramatic looks and the cowl. Like, come on. And the fact that he calls someone a spineless milksop to his secretary with this silly grin, and to establish just how evil this guy is, he comes into his office and just outright tells his accountant he framed him for fraud. No lies, no feigned sympathy, just outright, yeah, fool, I framed you, and then laughs evilly in his face, and he just kicks him out. This is so cold. I mean, he messes this guy up so bad, he goes out and just walks into oncoming traffic. Didn't even try and get help. Wonder what Legal Eagle thinks about this one. Naturally, this crash attracts the Daredevil's attention, although he is, of course, too late. But miraculously, one cop knows the guy and explains he worked for the Owl. And only a few minutes later, the cops tell Owl he needs to show up to court with a lawyer, to which Owl declares he doesn't need a lawyer, because there's no way he's connected to this. He ends up showing to court anyways, because, well, there is evidence. So Owl shows up in his whole costume, with his arms crossed and looking so pleased with himself. Look at this face. And proudly proclaiming, "Fine, I'll just pick one randomly," which ends up being Nelson and Murdoch, of course. And before Foggy can hang up, Matt just straight snatches the phone so he can take Owl's case. Okay, so stay with me here. Matt changes into Daredevil, wraps his wrinkle-free suit into a ball, and dribbles it on his way over to the court. Not the basketball court, I mean lawyer court. I wish we could get that adapted to the new Daredevil show. I'm sure Disney would love it. This leads Matt to deciding he needs to make a hood for his costume to put his clothes in. A fashion choice I don't see anyone talking about. That, I'll be honest, is kind of cool. As a matter of fact, at this point, I'm kind of growing fond of the yellow suit. I feel so strange saying this, so daring. Sorry, anyways, when Matt meets the Owl and senses his evil aura, is that a plus or minus aura, you guys? I don't know. Just by his breathing and pulse rate, I don't know how people can breathe evilly, but hey, maybe I could have been breathing evilly all my life. His deep voice tells me he's large, gross. Well, he doesn't mention anything about the smell, but I can believe that this guy doesn't brush his teeth. Repressed theater kid and all. But because he's a human lie detector, Matt can tell this man is not coming back to court, and he cackles off into the distance. I'm telling you guys, he's a theater kid. And sure enough, the Owl is nowhere to be seen the next day. So hey, now he's officially committed a crime, and having me and Matt thinking the same thing. What does he hope to gain from this? Like, is he stupid? Meanwhile, Matt declines Foggy and Karen's invite to go bowling with the classic blind excuse, while Karen secretly pines and pities him at the same time because of his blindness. She just never ceases to amaze me. Anyways, now with this new hood, Daredevil goes on the hunt for Owl in the sewers, on the bridges, at the train stations, and can't trace him. He deduces he must be out of the city and realizes his senses aren't infallible. Just a neat little moment of humility. So where is the Owl? Well, I'm gonna have to ask you to prepare yourselves, because this is the Owl's Airy. And it is truly something else, but it is so wonderfully camp and just makes the Owl even more hilarious to me. Like, he sat down and got this designed and built for him. And guests, like the two men we see join Owl as he sits on his big owl throne with an owl on his shoulder. Next thing you know, he's going to be stealing owl-themed artifacts like some other bird-themed villains. As Sad Sam poses a good question, what happened? Owl answers by saying he made a careless mistake. What does he mean? The intentionally not showing up to court part? The letting the guy he framed just leave his building part? I think there was more than one mistake here. So he has decided to double down on the whole criminal thing and is pretty fine with the world knowing he's finally embraced his theater kid dreams. The guys he brought are two men he wants to be his henchmen, and he just gets straight to the point into testing their skills by having them showcase them. Sam being the guy who shoots, and Ape being the muscle. They of course go through Owl's insane trials, and yeah, a man named Owl has a spare ape in a cage for some reason, just there. Now the Owl takes the opportunity to display his own power that he's going to use to fight the forces of law and order. Not for nothing do I call myself the Owl, not merely because I bear a slight physical resemblance. Okay, buddy. But he decides to show them by dropping them down a trap door, and as they are launched out through a tunnel, this man uses his coat to glide and carry the two to the ground, all for the sake of a power move. He's so extra. As his first order of business, he decides to go back to the city so he can get Matt to act as his front, even though he already sabotaged himself in front of him and has no reason to be trusted again. He's really not the smartest villain. So we cut back to Matt perturbed by the Owl on the loose, and Karen trying again to get Matt to get this operation, which he just outright declines this time while looking so unbothered. And when he asks her to leave, she gets upset with a single tear leaving her eye, and the two thinking there's no way the other could have feelings for them, but little do they know. Anyways, as Matt thinks that, he smells the scent of an owl. So I guess he really did smell him before. So he gets Foggy to leave by telling him the reason Karen is so sad is because he didn't walk her home. The love triangle is taking large strides now. And look at this little Daredevil standing so proudly. I love it. Daredevil stands outside the window, as sure-footed as a puma, as silent as a leopard, as fearless as a tiger. It's Superman. Oh, sorry, it's not right at all. When he hears the Owl and co. enter, he breaks through the window next door to his office. I guess he just doesn't like his neighbors that much. And he takes on the henchman by spinning the ape with his legs straight out of a cartoon and launching him into Sad Sam. Then, oddly, Sam is up and already ready to shoot behind him. Even more oddly, Daredevil bats away the bullet with his cane. Are we still using the wax bullets here? However, before Daredevil can outright beat these guys, which he clearly could if he can bat away bullets, Karen conveniently forgets her purse and walks in on them. And without any hesitation, Owl kidnaps her because Daredevil just shouts her name, a mistake he realizes he can't be making out here. So Daredevil does the unthinkable and surrenders. And now that the Owl has them both kidnapped, where does he keep them? In enormous bird cages, of course, and then proceeds to perch himself on a branch outside. This is amazing stuff, truly. And to really show how amazing he is, he lets all the mob bosses know he has captured Daredevil so he can rule over all of them. I'm telling you, man, he's definitely repressed in some way. As soon as Owl leaves, though, Daredevil springs into action with his trusty cane that honestly is getting up to the bat belt levels of convenience, with the concealed hinge, the cotter pin, and other attributes we'll see in later issues. It's really something. This, of course, helps him to escape his cage and fling himself over to Karen's, and instead of using his pin again because he thinks Karen will recognize the cane, he puts himself between the bars and bends them with his legs. This is explained by his sensitive touch to the pressure points. Still crazy. Prioritizing Karen's safety, Daredevil leads to one of Owl's cars, but before she leaves, she asks how he knows her, to which Daredevil just can't help but be flirty and say, "I've seen you in my dreams since I can remember," and forgets to mask his voice. I'm kind of getting secondhand embarrassment right now. Just then, Owl shows up, and Daredevil faces off with him so Karen can escape. But with a quick throw over the shoulder, Owl scampers off into the dark, which is, of course, no problem for Daredevil. Before Daredevil can catch him up the stairs, Owl sets another trap that leads to water where Daredevil's hearing is rendered useless. Meanwhile, Owl makes his escape by gliding off the ledge of his aviary to a boat he had prepared, and he drives off. Daredevil surfaces just in time to jam his propeller with his cane. Alright, seriously, what is this cane made of? Batting bullets and jamming propellers in full motion launches the Owl into the water and making him undetectable to Daredevil. So we end with Daredevil returning to the scene with cops and mobsters all convening, and the cops just taking them all in just like that. And Karen thinking, Matt has missed everything. Or does she? Intrigue! So that does it for the first 3 issues of Daredevil. I hope you enjoyed. I want to document my journey through all of classic Daredevil as we make our way to the new show that will eventually come out. So let me know if you enjoy this as much as I do, because this is really fun stuff. It's just so entertaining. In the same way that, Batman the Brave and the Bold is entertaining, where it's corny, but it's just a great time. It keeps you hooked with all the fantastical stuff that happens, and even some of the drama. Anyway, that's that. Goodbye.